if there are no background checks, how do you prevent, I know how you all are going to answer this, but I'm asking anyway. If there are no background checks for gun purchasers, how do you prevent felons or terrorists from walking into, say, a licensed gun dealer and purchasing a gun?
Well, one, if you're not in jail, you should still have your basic rights, and you should go buy a gun.
So if you're a terrorist or a felon?
If you're a felon and you've done your time, you should have your rights.
Well, the fact is, we do have statutes, both at the federal and state level, that prohibit classes of people from being in possession of firearms. If you're under 18 in Virginia, you can't walk around with a gun. If you're an illegal immigrant, if you're a convicted felon, if you've been adjudicated insane, these things are already illegal. So what we're really asking about is a question of prior restraint. How can we prevent future crime by identifying bad guys before they do anything bad? And the simple answer is you can't. And particularly under the legal system we have in the United States, there are a lot of Supreme Court opinions that say, no, prior restraint is something that the government does not have the authority to do. Until there is an overt act that allows us to say, that's a bad guy, then you can't punish him.
I would take another outlook on this. First, I'll ask you what crime or what law has ever stopped a crime? Tell me one law that has ever stopped a crime from happening.
Well, some would argue since the Brady Bill was enacted, people who have an opposing point of view, 2 million guns have been kept from the hands of criminals.
But who's to say that person that was denied a background check didn't go out and buy or steal a gun?
Well, perhaps it made it more difficult, and who knows? That's sort of hypothetical.
Okay.
But I think that's a law that kept guns from getting into the hands of people who should not own guns, according to people who support the Brady Bill.
If that were the case, we would have seen a significant reduction in crime with the reduction of sales of guns to people.
Or we would have seen a smaller increase, and that, again, is hard to measure.
I tell people all the time that if you go to Prince George's County, Maryland, it must be the safest place on earth because they have tremendous gun control. But in fact, it's practically the murder capital of the country. It's because people who have who otherwise law-abiding, self-reliant folks are prohibited from being able to defend themselves, and the people who want to kill them are not.
So,
like Chicago.
Back to the point
like
that
Chicago.
I was getting to in a roundabout way. If someone wants to commit murder, and even if they are prevented from getting a gun to commit that murder with, it doesn't necessarily stop them from committing the murder. And the murder is already against the law. The tool that they use may change. But if they are bound and determined to break a law, commit murder, commit robbery, break into somebody's house, whatever it is that they're going to do, then the law is not stopping them. It is just giving an avenue to punish them if and when they are caught.
Is it making it, though, potentially more difficult to carry out a crime if it is harder to obtain a gun?
I don't think it is harder to obtain a gun.
Well, let's say they aren't able to buy a gun legally because of a background check, and they have to go somewhere else, or they have to find someone to sell them a gun. Theoretically, is that making it perhaps harder for that person to go and kill someone they're angry at? Could they have changed their mind in the interim? I'm just asking.
I do not think that it would make a difference in the person wanting to commit the crime. Where we have seen it make a difference, and there was a case just recently, there was a woman that wanted to buy a gun because of an ex that was threatening to kill her, and there was a waiting period in the state that she lived in, and she was killed before the end of the waiting period.
And more murders are committed with hammers and knives and chainsaws and just household utensils, shovels, and whatever, than are killed with guns every year anyway.
Seriously?
Seriously.
I will say also that more automobiles are used in crimes than guns. And yet we don't go through background checks before we buy an automobile.
And represent a much greater threat to human life.
Absolutely.
More people are killed by
Killed
cars
or
than anything
injured.
else in
Absolutely.
America. The other thing I was thinking about with respect to what you're saying, my favorite example is protective orders. You know, the young mother gets a protective order because her crazy husband has expressed violent threats against her. So he's supposed to stay away from the house, stay more than 2,000 feet, for example, for a period of a week, and then the protective order becomes permanent, so it goes to a year. But if he comes up to the house armed with anything, a baseball bat, a piece of pipe,
Bare hands.
I mean, what is she going to do? Hold up this piece of pipe? You can't do that. I have a protective order.
What about those who want to approach that situation by making it harder for the perpetrator of the domestic violence to obtain a gun?
Is that going to stop a baseball
bat?
bat?
We're going to have baseball bat background checks.
Or knife background checks. When you go to your Kmart or Walmart, you're going to do a background check for a kitchen knife?
Or automobiles.
Yeah, I mean, consider the movie Psycho. How many women lock their doors to the showers after the movie Psycho? I'm sure you remember that. When I hear the Bradys and their allies start advocating for background checks for kitchen knives, then I might start taking them seriously. But at this point, they're inconsistent.
We can talk about Chicago. I'm sorry about that. We can talk about Chicago. Up until last year, guns were completely banned in Chicago. Actually, it's the last state to actually issue concealed handgun permits. But then again, it didn't stop criminals from getting a handgun and doing shooting after shooting after shooting over there. Again, it was the strictest city was Chicago for handguns. Now, again, so that just proves right there that okay, fine, if you make it harder to get a handgun legally, it'll stop someone like me or anybody in this room to get a handgun because, again, we're law-abiding citizens. But a criminal who wants to do a crime, he can get a gun from the black market for much, much cheaper, too.
You actually surprised when I told you about the hammers and things like that. There's a local economist in this area. It's also a friend of mine. His name's Dr. John Lott, and he wrote a book, More Guns, Less Crime. So you don't have to necessarily just take Ed's word for it. You grab the book, and he pulls all the statistics from FBI databases and the murders and the cases and things like that, and you can look for yourself in black and white, and then verify it with the cases, so the viewers don't have to just take our word for what we're saying here in the circle.
I'll tell the producers about that book.
And the honest truth about gun owners, if you look at the state of Florida, there are 2.5 million people who carry a handgun license, and so they carry almost every day. 2.5 million people. But again, they've been doing that since 1987. Now, out of 2.5 million, only 168 people committed a firearm felony. Okay, so out of 168, out of 2.5 million people, that's only 0.00006%.
And that's assuming that the people who committed the felonies were in that group to begin with.
Exactly.
I've talked to a lot of parents who have lost children to gun violence in the course of this documentary. They say they really don't want to take people's guns away, but they do feel there are some lax regulations that do allow dangerous people to own guns. With this in mind, what concessions would you all be willing to make, and what concessions would you want those who support tougher gun laws to make? Is there any middle ground in this whole national conversation?
Well, the proper question to ask is what concessions are they willing to make? Since it's
I think let's